This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey everyone, before this episode starts, I just want to let you know that the first couple of segments here have a little bit of a problem with the audio. Basically, a Windows update reset all my settings, including the gain on my microphone. So it's a little bit blown out. Hope it's not too annoying for you. Fixed it by the time the third segment rolls around, but just want to apologize for the poor audio quality in the first 2 segments. All right, enjoy the show. Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. We are 1 week away from the biggest entertainment franchise on the planet turning 30 years old. So in this episode, we will be doing a historical look back at the creation of the earliest Pokémon games. I will be joined by a special guest for the final segment of this episode, but for now, it's just going to be me. We're going to run down some of the news that has come out over the last week in pretty quick fashion, since we have a pretty substantial main topic to get to in the second segment. But before we get to that, and before we get to the news, I wanted to share my updated thoughts on a game I actually mentioned kind of in the middle of a storm of impressions that we had last week's episode. Fur Squadron Phoenix. That is out now on Steam, and it comes to Switch next week. And I played through it. You can read my review on GameInformer.com right now. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, it is the Star Fox 64 successor that I have been waiting for nearly 30 years now. Star Fox 64 came out in 1997. So 29 years later, we finally have a game that kind of captures what I loved so much about Star Fox 64. And you know, there's things I don't like about this game, but I want to focus on the stuff that I do like first, and that is, you know, the boss battles are super creative. The controls, it feels great to just like fly around to guide your. It's not called an R-wing, I think it's called a starfighter, around these on-rail segments, and I love that like the upgrades are permanent, so it's not like you have to find the double laser every level if you lose it or whatever. It's really impressive how they've captured the spirit of what Star Fox 64 was able to bring, because nobody has really captured that spirit since. Like, the closest that Nintendo has come in capturing Star Fox 64's spirit was Star Fox 64 3D, which even that was just a straight up remake of Star Fox 64. So like it's wild to me that Nintendo doesn't seem to understand what to do with Star Fox as a franchise. But as we saw with like Metroid and Castlevania, when there are these absences, these long periods without an official release, indie developers who grew up on those games are going to step in and take over. That's why we saw the Metroidvania genre explode, because Nintendo wasn't giving us any Metroid games. Konami wasn't giving us any Castlevania games. So indie developers were like Thanos at the end of Age of Ultron. Were like, fine, I'll do it myself. And they did. And then you see Nintendo and Konami, we'll get to Konami in a bit here. You see them looking over the fence like, oh, there's actually a market for these types of games. So I actually see this as a very positive development, that there is a very strong spiritual successor to Star Fox. And I'm hoping that means that it'll kind of light a match underneath Nintendo to try and figure out and crack this code of what Star Fox once was and what it could be. Because it just really does feel like a rudderless ship at this point. And most people at this point, I think, probably know Fox and Falco better from Smash Brothers than they do from their own games, similar to Captain Falcon. But, it takes place a lot in a training simulation. Like, there's 8 levels, and it largely takes place in this training simulation. I think it's 5 levels are in training simulations. 3 are like real in-universe levels. And it has like roguelite style progression, but like you don't lose any progress aside from the level that you're on if you die. Instead, it just boots you back. And what I love is that even if you die, you still get experience points, and you can use those skill points to level up your thing. So like if you get destroyed by a boss on a level, you can leave that level with the progress that you made giving you experience, and then go and like, oh, my shields were really not good enough for that boss, or my lasers weren't doing enough damage. Level up your character using the experience you got even in that failed attempt, and then go back and have a much better shot, in addition to, you know, the knowledge of what's coming and like what you have to aim for, because every boss has like their attack patterns, they have weak points like they do in Star Fox. And it really does capture that feeling of like trying it again, not having to worry about losing progress. The only thing is that on those 3 levels that are like real in universe levels, you don't get any experience points, which is like the most arbitrary, weird division line that I've ever seen in a game. Like it's such a weird thing that like, oh, well, this is happening in the real world, so you wouldn't learn anything from it. And I understand like if you like die in a real world mission, you would not gain experience because you'd be dead. But like if you win, you don't get any experience either, which, you know, I would say like real world experience is more important than like experience in a simulation. But I get it. But it's just like it made it so I didn't replay those levels. Instead, I would go back and replay the simulation levels if I wanted to grind for experience and level up my characters, or level up my character. The thing about leveling up your characters is that you have an overdrive, which is basically your ultimate, and it slows down time and it adds a multiplier to your damage. Now, as you complete side tasks for these levels, so you have 3 teammates, 3 squad mates. One is basically like Fox. He's a ferret. The other one is a fruit bat. That's basically the Falco character. And then you have Axel, which is an axolotl. I never know how to pronounce that word, but she's basically the Slippy character. So for the Fox character, he will give you commands of like, hey, clear this path for us. And if you clear all the debris away or whatever, you will level up your relationship with that character. And then Kiro is the fruit bat, who's basically like a Falco style character. He'll be like, he's very much like, hey, prove to me you're good. So he will take you through like, hey, there's like rings you need to fly through, and like if you can keep up with me, then like you gain respect in his eyes, and it levels up your relationship with that character. And then Axel, in true Slippy inspired fashion, will often find herself with enemies on her tail, and you have to save her. And then that levels up your relationship with her. And each time you level up your relationship with those characters, it improves your ultimate ability. So your overdrive gets better. So, you know, you level up one character, it makes it so your shields are recovered when you use your ultimate. If you level up another character, it makes it so your special weapons are recovered. And if you level up another one, it makes it so that you do more damage when you go into your ultimate state. And you know, those special weapons, I like that there's actually 4 that you can choose from at any time once you unlock all 4 of them. And, you know, it's the standard like Star Fox 64 bomb. There is multi-target missiles. So like you lock on to like up to 5 targets and just unleash like a barrage of missiles that'll take out a bunch of enemies, which is really, really helpful. One that I really loved using on bosses was like this power beam, where it starts off like really low damage, but if you keep it on the enemy, it warms up and starts melting away their health or shields. And then there's a nuke that actually, you know, it can clear the screen, but it's not as versatile as the other ones. But yeah, you know, and it isn't a full like 1-to-1 from Star Fox 64. You know, the story wasn't as interesting to me. The antagonist wasn't as interesting as Andros was to me. There's no real like, I mean, there's rivals, but like not in the same sense that you get with like Star Wolf. There's no all range mode, stuff like that, and there's no multiplayer. It's only single player, and like, you know, there's only 8 levels. It's not like branching paths through these levels or anything. It's solely you play through these 8 levels and then that's it. And you know, I really enjoyed my time with it. I wish there was more to it, but you know, this is as good as I've seen in terms of spiritual successors to Star Fox, and it's so perfect that it's on Switch. That's what I reviewed it on. It runs pretty well on the Switch too. And yeah, it's available now on Steam, available on the 25th for Switch. So if you're looking for a Star Fox 64 successor, the way if you've listened to this podcast in recent episodes, I have been kind of on a Star Fox 64 kick. So this is hitting at a perfect time for me. You can do a lot worse than Fur Squadron Phoenix, which, if you're listening to this podcast, it is available very soon on Switch 2 or Switch. I don't know if it's just on Switch or Switch 2. And there's also this was a prequel to a game that came out in 2023 that is called Fur Squadron, which feels more like a spiritual successor of Star Fox on SNES, more so than 64. But the story of Fur Squadron Phoenix, which I just played through, leads right into the events of Fur Squadron, and that's also available on Switch. I think it's only like $6 too. So yeah, definitely worth checking out if you have fond memories of Star Fox 64. So we're going to jump over to the news in just a second. But first, a reminder that this show is brought to you by the fine folks who support me on Patreon. Without them, the show literally would not exist. You can get access to the community Discord for as little as $3 a month, where we are talking Nintendo, the latest gaming news, and showing off whatever is new in our collections all day long. But there are also $5 and $10 tiers to get you early and ad-free episodes, plus shout-outs at the end of every show. You can join the team that makes this show happen by going to patreon.com and searching for Brian Shea or All Things Nintendo. It truly is only because of the fine folks who support this podcast on Patreon that I'm able to keep this going as an independent entity week after week. All right, with all of that preamble out of the way, let's jump into a little bit of news here. You may not realize this, but we actually got 2 Nintendo releases this week. They were both kind of surprise launches. I'm recording this on Thursday. They both hit today, just kind of out of nowhere. The first surprise release is called Hello Mario, and it is a free-to-use app that is on Switch and mobile devices. And it's basically an extended stretchy face minigame from the beginning of Mario 64. Obviously modern like visuals and very cartoony, but like it's fully voiced. I messed around with it just a little bit. And you can, I was playing on my iPhone. You can stretch Mario's face out. You can give him a mushroom and he'll grow. You can give him like the music block and he'll sing like, I guess, one of a few songs from the Mario franchise. You can have him play peekaboo. You can give him like if you put the pipe on the screen, he'll go into the pipe, and there are 3 that will pop up, and like different characters will come in, and you're supposed to like pull Mario up. And there's question mark blocks that different things will happen. You can give him like put an enemy on screen and it will shrink him if he gets hit by it. It's very much geared towards children, which, is actually probably brilliant marketing by Nintendo to give a little thing where they can mess around with Mario's face, especially since so many of them are going to be getting back into Mario very, very soon with the Mario Galaxy movie. But with that said, if you are a teenager or above, I would say don't go into this expecting too much. But it is available now on Switch, iOS, and Android, and it is free. So, and I do like that there, if you want to try to go into the settings menu, it knows that kids are going to be like mashing the screen. So you actually have to read what order you're supposed to hit the buttons and then hit them in that specific order in order to access the settings. So, it does have a little bit of a child proof if like you're giving it to a kid that's not old enough to read, which is nice. So on the other side here, we did receive a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of a very well-liked RPG, and that is Xenoblade Chronicles X. So this new version is adding up to 4K resolution and 60 frames per second in TV mode and 1080p up to 60 frames per second in handheld mode. And, you can upgrade from the Switch 1 version to the Switch 2 version. But the catch is that, like, you have to buy an upgrade pack for this, even though it's just a visual upgrade. And I have looked forward to these Switch 2 editions, especially for, like, some of my favorite Switch 1 games. But I have gotten to a point where I'm giving Nintendo more of a hard time on its pricing, because we have got to stop charging for these no added content Switch 2 editions. Like, they're charging to make a game which was already called Definitive Edition, which should mean you have the best version of that game. They are charging to make it run the way a modern video game does. And I feel like I wouldn't be so annoyed at this if it was an older game. but it's a $5 upgrade, and it's to improve your alleged definitive edition that came out less than a year ago. And that, I don't know, that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And you look over at the fence at how Xbox and PlayStation have usually handled, and I say usually because they've done their own weirdness with this new gen stuff at times. But when you look over at that over that fence at Xbox and PlayStation, and like when they put out a new console, they've traditionally handled those things for free, and they've done what this Xenoblade Chronicles X upgrade purports to do. And like, I still remember when I was playing Ghost of Tsushima, and I was playing it on my PS4, and then the PS5 came out, and I went and got my PS5, hooked it up, and I was like, well, I want to keep playing Xenoblade. I want to keep wanting to play Ghost of Tsushima because I am super into this and I want to finish it. And firing it up on PS5, it was like a brand new game. And then, like, Xbox Series X, if you fired up Sonic Unleashed, which was an Xbox 360 game that was more than a decade old at the time, if you fired that up on Xbox Series X, it ran like a new game. And then, you look at how inconsistent Nintendo has been with this. Like Animal Crossing New Horizons, just last month, had these visual improvements, but they also added content, and that was a $5 release. And then that was a much older game. And you look at like Kirby and the Forgotten Land and Super Mario Brothers Wonder, and they're charging a lot more, but they also added a ton of content. And, maybe a more direct comparison is Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. They just gave us a free update about a year after it came out. So that's almost a perfect analogy, a perfect comparison here, where Donkey Kong Country Returns HD came out, and it was supposed to be the definitive edition. People said this doesn't really run as well as we want. So a year after it came out, they put out a game, or put out an update, made it run how people wanted it to, and it added new content, and it was completely free. Now, $5 for Xenoblade Chronicles X to run really well, it just doesn't feel like look, $5 for a game that you like, to make it look and run better isn't a ton to ask, and I get that. But when it's a new definitive edition, as they called it, and they're charging to make that definitive edition even more definitive less than a year after that version came out, it just it's not a great look. And it's not as bad as, like, if they were to, say, charge for like a Switch 2 version of Scarlet and Violet, which, they would have rightly been raked over the coals for, because that game just never ran well on the Switch 1. But, I don't know. This just seems like a step too far in terms of like Nintendo's Switch 2 pricing strategy. And I don't know. Like, let me know what your thoughts are. Because, like, if you are interested, I don't fault you if you are, because like when I play a game, especially a game that I really love, I want the best possible version. Like I picked up the Switch 2 versions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and they barely did more than what this version of Xenoblade Chronicles X says that it does. And those were $10 each, unless you're a Switch Online subscriber. But I will say that those upgrades to like the higher frame rate, higher resolution, gave me more than $10 of enjoyment, because it improved my experience of those games so much. So like, I do get it, and I don't fault any players for picking up this upgrade pack for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. Like, in fact, if you are hoping to play Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, I would even go as far as to recommend you get this upgrade. My problem is on Nintendo's side, because I just wish Nintendo wouldn't do its players like that. So, all that said, if you are interested in Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, very, very weird naming there. Yeah, that's exactly what edition is in the name twice. I'm looking at the press release right here. Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition Nintendo Switch 2 Edition is available now, and there's a physical version coming in April. All right, well, last week we got a PlayStation State of Play, which, primarily, as the name implies, concerned PlayStation owners. But we also had an unexpected publisher step into the spotlight, and that was Konami. Like, I was only recently on this podcast kind of smack talking them because they just don't do anything with their franchises. And I wouldn't say this effectively shut me up, but it definitely, like, made me kind of step back and be like, all right, let's see what they've got. So first up, we got a reveal of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2, which means we are finally getting Metal Gear Solid 4 free from the PS3, which is the first time that it is coming out on any platform other than PlayStation 3. And the collection includes Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, as well as Metal Gear Ghost Babel, which is a very good Game Boy Color game that kind of toys with the story of the original Metal Gear Solid. And even with that, though, it's like a really small collection. Like, this is 3 games, and they're Metal Gear Ghost Babel is it's being billed as like a bonus thing, which it almost seems to indicate like you have to buy the joint collection there to get that game. So it's like incentive to buy both games. But I feel like it's like a missed opportunity, because it would have been cool to see like Revengeance or Phantom Pain, which are still not on Switch 2. I know they're on like the other platforms, especially if you have an Xbox, because it's backward compatible on there. But if that interests you, and I mean, yeah, Metal Gear Solid 4 coming to Switch is a huge thing, especially since it's been locked on the PS3 since it came out. This arrives on Switch, Switch 2, and every other major platform on August 27th. But Konami wasn't done yet, because it also announced it is celebrating the 40th anniversary of Castlevania this year, with the announcement of Castlevania Belmont's Curse. So this is a 2D Castlevania title developed in conjunction with Konami by the studios that created Dead Cells, so Evil Empire and Motion Twin, which I cannot imagine a better way to bring this franchise back. So Dead Cells is already the main way that gamers have interacted with the Castlevania franchise for many years. I think the last Castlevania game was 2014, Lords of Shadow 2. And we've gotten the Castlevania expansion in Dead Cells. We got a Castlevania expansion in Vampire Survivors, but this is the first official new Castlevania game in 12 years. So obviously, I think it makes sense to tap one of the studios that has been, or two of the studios, I guess, that has been so obviously inspired by Castlevania. And, I've already made my sentiments on Dead Cells pretty well known on this podcast. But, it's in the current definition of indie games, Dead Cells is a top 5 indie game of all time for me. It's up there with like Balatro and Vampire Survivors. It's a fantastic Metroidvania, even using like the roguelite elements to it. And this game, it looks phenomenal. I cannot wait to get my hands on it. I have nothing but the utmost faith in Motion Twin and Evil Empire to deliver an incredible Castlevania game. And Castlevania Belmont's Curse comes out on Switch and every other major platform later this year. And that's not all on the Castlevania front, because Konami actually updated right after this announcement about Belmont's Curse. It updated its Castlevania landing page with a message to fans. And it says, quote, "The doors of Castlevania open once more. This year marks the 40th anniversary since the original Akumajo Dracula first saw the light of day. In this commemorative year, Castlevania will be revived. First up is this title, Castlevania Belmont's Curse. We couldn't think of other studios to work together rather than Evil Empire and Motion Twin." Sorry, there's a little bit of weird grammar there. "Studios brimming with talent and passion to deliver a new exploration-based 2D action game that captures the essence of Castlevania while bringing fresh innovation. This is the beginning of numerous new products around Castlevania. Look forward to the return of the magnificent nightmare lurking in the darkness." And it's signed the Castlevania series production team. So I don't know about you, but that last line there, the use of the word products, worried me at first and made me think that like they're talking about like merchandising or pachinko machines or whatever Konami used to do. But then I thought about like, my Japanese interviews, which, at this point I've done hundreds. A lot of the times the translation usually comes through where they refer to players as users and games as products. So through that lens, I mean, again, it could mean anything. But through that lens, this sounds promising to me that Konami is really like coming back to the game, right? And paying attention to its iconic franchises, in particular Castlevania in this case, which is a great thing. Konami used to be one of the preeminent developers in the games industry. And hopefully this means we are going to see it throw its hat back into the ring. Because I know I had a lot of great memories like growing up playing Konami games, the X-Men arcade game, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games. The Simpsons arcade game was one of my favorites. And then, of course, like, Contra, Castlevania. And I know a lot of people have a lot of love for Metal Gear Solid. I kind of missed that in my youth. But yeah, this is very promising news, I think. I think that, a lot of diehard Konami fans are diehard Metal Gear and Castlevania. I don't know if there's diehard Konami fans anymore in 2026, but there are diehard fans of these franchises because their legacies are so important. And it has felt weird these past like 10, 15 years to have Konami have such a small footprint in the games industry. So I am beyond ecstatic that these franchises seem to be coming back. And they did hint a little bit that Metal Gear might have something else in the works, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. So we're going to end the news segment on some video game movie news, which we're right around the corner from the Mario Galaxy movie. But that's not where this is coming from. Instead, we have Sonic the Hedgehog 4 news. So just to recap, the cast of Sonic, the Sonic Cinematic Universe, already includes Ben Schwartz, James Marsden, Jim Carrey, Idris Elba, and Keanu Reeves, not to mention a bunch of other actors who play the more side characters. And they've now officially welcomed Kristen Bell as the voice of Amy Rose. The Hollywood Reporter was the outlet that got the scoop, and then Ben Schwartz posted on his Instagram confirming the news, a picture with Kristen Bell. They're each holding their character's figure, which is very, very cute picture. So Kristen Bell has starred in Veronica Mars, Frozen, Frozen 2, House of Lies, and my personal favorite work of hers, The Good Place. Very, very great show if you have not watched that already. But Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is currently scheduled to hit theaters in just over a year on March 19th, 2027. Kristen Bell, obviously a fantastic addition to the cast. I think she captures the essence of Amy Rose pretty perfectly. And we've already seen through her work as Anna in the Frozen franchise that she is also a phenomenal voice actor. So I'm looking forward to that. And, it's exciting to see Amy join this franchise after, this franchise has only gotten better. I think that every subsequent entry in the Sonic movie franchise has been better than the one before it. And Sonic 3 was easily the best yet, in my opinion. But that is all the news we are going to cover for this episode. We are going to take our first break. And when we get back, I will be running down the history of the early Pokemon franchise. We will be right back.
How old were you when you realized you were the son of a president?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before.
FX's Love Story. John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette.
I didn't think I could love someone like this until you.
From executive producer Ryan Murphy.
It's not a question of if I want to spend the rest of my life with you. It's if I'm cut out to be Mrs. JFK Jr.
FX's Love Story. John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. Watch now on FX, Hulu, and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers.
We are back, and next week we are going to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Pokemon franchise as a society through a Pokemon Presents stream with, I'm assuming, a ton of announcements. But as people who listen to this podcast are well aware, it is going to be a super busy episode because every time there has been a Pokemon Presents, those episodes are usually pretty jam-packed with analysis of the news. So as such, on this podcast, we are going to be celebrating Pokemon's milestone anniversary right here, right now on this episode. So kind of a pregame for the real anniversary, which is a week from now. So, as we typically do on this podcast, when a big anniversary comes around, I am going to kind of just, reflect a little bit on the creation of this franchise and a little bit on, the history of how it came to be. So the creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, grew up in an area of Tokyo called Mashita, and he loved going to the lakes and the ponds and running around and catching bugs and small animals. And, in high school, he started going to an arcade that opened near his house, and he started playing video games. And unfortunately, around that time, Japan was going through a rapid period of expansion. in particular in Tokyo. So a lot of his nature that he loved was kind of destroyed during that time. And while in college in 1983, Tajiri started self-publishing a video game magazine called Game Freak, which at the time was actually the earliest video game focused magazine in Japan, or at least one of them. And a manga artist named Ken Sugimori reached out to Tajiri in hopes of getting to work on Game Freak. And after a conversation, he became an illustrator for the magazine. And a couple of years later, they actually, along with some other friends that they had met, started a development team, which they also called Game Freak. And around that time, Tajiri was starting to become kind of like this well-respected game journalist in Japan. And he became friends with a businessman named Tsunekazu Ishihara, and they kind of just started keeping in touch over the years. And Ishihara at that time was, he was aware of Tajiri because Ishihara was often working on production on game-focused programming within Japan. So he knew of Tajiri's work, and so that's how they started developing this relationship. Meanwhile, the Game Freak developers were kind of working together on projects on the side of their day jobs or school, and they began working on a puzzle game called Quinty. And they pretty quickly realized that nobody on the team knew how to make music. So in the middle of this development, Tajiri started asking around, like, hey, do you guys know any composers? And multiple people had referred him to this composer in the area who was named Junichi Masuda. So they reached out and they brought Masuda in to create the music. And Quinty ended up getting published by Namco in 1989. And that same year, Tajiri started taking game development more seriously. He was like, hey, the Namco published our game. So he incorporated Game Freak as an official business entity. And then, of course, around that time, Game Freak, the magazine, closed down in the late 80s. But this really does. Maybe there's hope for me yet, because he went from being a games journalist who started writing about video games while in college, which was kind of how I got my start, and now he is the creator of Pokemon. So there's a little bit of a glimmer of hope for me yet. So around that time, Tajiri started thinking about creating a game that involved his childhood hobby of catching small creatures. And coincidentally, Nintendo released the Game Boy and co-founded a company called Ape Inc., which was built around having outside developers come in and pitch their game ideas. And wouldn't you know it, it just so happened that Ishihara was involved in management at Ape Inc. And he started like kind of talking with Tajiri about pitching an idea to Ape Inc. And Tajiri, after hearing about the concept of the Game Boy link cable, he started thinking about ideas of using that in unique ways. And he liked the idea of the link cables being able to pass things back and forth, because a lot of the time it was meant for like kind of simultaneous multiplayer on the Game Boy. And he played Dragon Quest II, Tajiri did, and he liked the idea of certain items in the game having higher rarities. So, he was talking with other people who had played Dragon Quest II, and he's like, yeah, I found this item. And they're like, I never found that item. And he's like, yeah, apparently it's really rare. So he started work on a game that he said he wanted to tell the story of a boy's summer day. And the original concept was about going around and catching creatures with different rarities. And he kind of thought back to his childhood of going to these ponds and these fields that now really, for the most part, no longer exist because they were kind of taken over by this urban crawl that happened in Tokyo during his childhood and teenage years. And so he wanted to go around, catch creatures with different rarities, and then use the Game Boy's link cable to allow people to have these rarer creatures and trade them back and forth with friends who also have the game. And Tajiri was also inspired by the Final Fantasy Legend, which was the first RPG on the Game Boy. So he realized that a big RPG on the Game Boy was actually possible, even with all the tech limitations. So that original idea of having creatures who have different rarities and being able to trade them back and forth within an RPG was basically the elevator pitch for Pokemon games. So like I think that the conceptual nature of that idea really nailed it right out of the gate, because a lot of times I talk to developers and they're like, yeah, well, the original idea was this, but then we decided like it would be better if it was this, and like we added this element to it. And obviously, Pokemon is a much bigger thing than just creatures of different rarities that you can trade. But that really, Tajiri had the concept of Pokemon in his brain so perfectly, and that's super impressive to look back. This is 1989, 1990 that he's having these ideas. So a lot of the Game Freak developers were also fans of kaiju entertainment. So, like giant monsters that would rampage through the streets. And they used that love for inspiration for a lot of the creatures that you were going to go around and catch. And as a kid, Tajiri liked one show called Ultra 7. And in that show, the main character carried around these small capsules that contained kaiju. But when the character released them, they came out in full size to do whatever he needed to do, oftentimes fighting the enemies. So that obviously served as the inspiration for Pokeballs. And originally, Tajiri wanted to call it Capsule Monsters, or shortened to Kapumon. But that, unfortunately, Capsule Monsters was not able to be trademarked in Japan because, gachapon culture was so permeating of Japanese culture, and they often refer to them as capsule. So there was a problem with that being too ubiquitous within Japanese culture. So Tajiri pivoted and thought of a more unique name, and that name was Pocket Monsters, or as we know it now, Pokemon. So Tajiri took the idea for Pocket Monsters to Ape Inc., and the idea was brought back to then president of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, who reportedly called it the idea that they had been waiting for. So they signed Pokemon to a development and distribution deal in early 1990. And the expectation that Yamauchi and Nintendo gave to Game Freak was they wanted the game delivered to Nintendo by the fall of 1990, which, if you are listening to this and with the awareness that this is the 30th anniversary, you're pretty aware that did not happen. They did not deliver the game in fall of 1990. So the team was as follows. I mean, there were more people than just this, but the leadership team was Satoshi Tajiri as director, Ishihara, who, again, was part of Ape Inc. and had this existing relationship with Tajiri from when Tajiri was running Game Freak as a gaming magazine. Ishihara signed on to produce. Ken Sugimori was the art lead, and Junichi Masuda composed the soundtrack and helped program alongside a few of the other developers. And unfortunately, the scope of this game just kept growing, and the budget that Nintendo gave them was far too low for what the game had grown into. So after, about a year and a half of work, in 1991, Game Freak paused Pokemon development because they needed to focus on more immediately profitable games and games that they could get, funding that would fund the entirety of their vision for the game. So they released the puzzle game Yoshi for the NES. They released Mario and Wario for the SNES, and then they released Pulseman for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on what region you're in. So even while they were working on those games, the Game Freak developers kept kind of kicking around these ideas of what a game, what a Pokemon game could be. And in an interview, this was a book that came out in Japan. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name, but there was an interview that Sugimori gave that was saying that they would still occasionally tinker with it in their free time, but nobody was really working on Pokemon for about 3 years there. And then in 1994, Tajiri had finally had it, and he decided that it was time to finally try and make Pokemon happen again. And, at this point, the team was way more experienced in development. They had added a few more people onto the team. So, they felt that they were just way more well-equipped to create this game at this point. And Ishihara, now part of the team, used his experience with collectible card games to, kind of add more depth and fine tune the turn-based battling system that the team was already kind of, conceptualizing. And then Ishihara also came up with the idea of a Pokédex using his love for collectible card games, because he wanted a sort of encyclopedia that documented your progress in collectibles, and you could go in and look and like learn more about these creatures. And to play into the collectible side of the title, and the idea of the link cables allowing you to trade creatures of different rarities, Shigeru Miyamoto from Nintendo actually came to Tajiri and proposed that they create 2 identical versions with different Pokemon within them. So that is how Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green were created, right? Like Shigeru Miyamoto was like, hey, like, yes, Pokemon with different rarities, that's great. But what if there were 2 different versions? So people who had one version could get Pokemon that people who had the other version could not get. And then you could link up and trade between those 2 versions and round out your Pokédex. Obviously, that is the route that they went. Excuse me. And to make it relate more to his own childhood, Tajiri chose to base it in Kanto, which is, based on the Kanto region of Japan. So he also made one of the default names of the protagonist as Satoshi to represent him. And then one of the default names that you can choose for your rival is Shigeru, not because he viewed Shigeru Miyamoto as a rival, but because he viewed him as a mentor and role model. So Ken Sugimori worked alongside fewer than 10 people to create 151 finalized Pokemon designs. And during the development of Pulseman, an artist named Atsuko Nishida joined Game Freak during its development. And Nishida actually would go on to create several of the most iconic Pokemon designs, including Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. And then Masuda created the music as well as the cries of the Pokemon. So all those cries that still persist to this day were largely the work of Junichi Masuda. And he looked at marching band music as the inspiration for the now iconic battle music that and if you've played the Pokemon franchise. So in 1995, Ishihara founded Creatures, which essentially was an evolution from Ape Inc. And shortly after he founded it, Game Freak actually gave part ownership of the Pokemon brand to Creatures. So there were now 3 part owners of the franchise. There was Creatures, which handled Ishihara, which later would eventually evolve into kind of handling kind of some of the branding alongside what would eventually become the Pokemon Company. Then there was Game Freak, who's the developer, and then Nintendo, who was in charge of publishing duties. So development of Pokemon went on for 6 years, which was almost an eternity in game development back then. Now, obviously, for a few of those years, there was no active development on it, but from 1990 to 1996, Pokemon was in development in some way, even if it was just ideas being kicked around. And Pokemon Red and Green was originally supposed to release in 1995, but they had to delay it to the next year. But they didn't want to wait to the holiday season because they really wanted to, start getting some sales on this game that has been in development for so long. So Pokemon Red and Green released in Japan on February 27th, 1996. And we talked a little bit about this in the Pokemon Gold and Silver episode. I think that was last year. But Pokemon was not a big hit when it first released, which, in an Iwata Asks that I found, Ishihara partially attributed to the game's delay to February of 1996, which meant that rather than releasing in the holiday season where a lot of people were going to be buying video games, it released in the worst time of the year for video game sales. And at the time, it was pretty outdated hardware. I saw an article that was basically calling the Game Boy at that point in 1996, yesterday's news. And here's Ishihara's quote from Iwata Asks, quote, "It was originally conceived as a game that would be developed for this new hardware," because 1990, the Game Boy was still pretty new back then. And then back to Ishihara, quote, "Then there were substantial delays in completing the title. Still, as the producer, when I saw the content of Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green, my personal feeling was that of all the titles I had experience of, that I had played or worked on as a producer, This was the very highest caliber. That is to say, I was confident that this was streets ahead of the crowd in terms of sheer enjoyment. But with the release date being what it was, I had considerable concerns about the title at first. And, sales of Red and Green just were not great right out of the gate. But then a Japanese manga featuring Pokemon released. And that's when it started garnering more attention for the franchise. And then as more people picked it up, word of mouth about how good Pokemon Red and Green were started spreading throughout the country. And it ended up being a massive success. And Ishihara said that before long, they started selling the same number of games that they sold a week. It's the same number of games that they were selling in a month in those early months. They started matching that number in a week. And then shortly after that, they started tripling or quadrupling their monthly sales in just a matter of a week. And after a year and a half on the market, Pokemon Red and Green finally reached number 1 in Japan, which was also, just as Nintendo and Game Freak were ramping up efforts to bring Pokemon to the West. And that would be done as Game Freak had released a kind of a somewhat upgraded version. It wasn't like a full upgraded version as we know now, but they had released Pokemon Blue in Japan, and you could get it by mailing in to get it. I don't think they actually released it on shelves at the time, but Game Freak chose to release it as Pokemon Red and Blue rather than Red and Green, because Green in Japan had a bit more of a notoriety with glitches, but also Blue felt like a more opposing color to Red. So they ultimately decided that for the Western localization to release it as Pokemon Red and Blue. And that happened in 1998. And a localization team went through every Pokemon name aside from Pikachu and renamed them for Western players. And then they also went through and trademarked all of the names across all regions to prevent any of the characters from popping up elsewhere. So Pokemon Yellow, which is actually considered the first of the true upper versions of the Pokemon games, came out in Japan in 1998 and then 1999 in the US. And this had various changes to appeal to fans of the anime, which was also extremely popular at this time, including Pikachu acting as your starter, your rival starting with Eevee, and then the inclusion of characters that are, like from the anime, like Jesse, James, and Meowth from Team Rocket. And 1999 was also when Pokemon Stadium came out, which let you transfer your Pokemon to the Nintendo 64 to battle them with 3D graphics. And at this point, I remember thinking Pokemon Stadium was the dream come true, because I was watching the anime pretty religiously, and I wanted something that looked like that. And that was as close as you could get back in, the late 90s. And this first generation of games, they were also remade twice. So first was Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance in 2004, and that brought the story up to then modern standards. I still think this is maybe the best looking Pokemon game of all time, this generation at least. The Game Boy Advance sprites were just so crisp, and they looked so beautiful and so colorful. And it also added a full post game where it would allow you to go around and collect Pokemon that were not from Gen 1, which was pretty cool, by exploring these different islands that popped up in the post game. And then Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee served as kind of Game Freak's training wheels to start developing for console rather than handheld. And I actually got Junichi Masuda when I visited Game Freak back in 2019. He and Shigeru Omori basically confirmed to me that we wanted to see what we were getting ourselves into with a full RPG game on consoles, and how much work it would be to bring it to these higher resolution platforms and see what we could do with it. So that's why they chose to remake Pokemon Yellow essentially through Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee for Switch, before they jumped over to doing Sword and Shield and then eventually Scarlet and Violet and whatever Gen 10 ends up being. So really, if you look back at it, the Pokemon empire was built upon Red, Blue, and Green. They took that ball and ran with it with, over the top merchandising, extremely popular Pokemon trading card game that I still kick myself to this day for getting rid of all of my first edition cards back in the day. because God, they're worth so much money now. A long-running anime that's still going to this day. Ton of sequels, ton of spin-offs. I've mentioned this several times, but today Pokemon is the highest grossing entertainment franchise of all time. And it's not even particularly close. It's around 115 billion with a B total revenue. And number 2 is Mickey Mouse and Friends with 61.2 billion. So just over half of Pokemon's total revenue. And the vast majority of that is retail sales. So it's merchandising, it's sales of the games, it's anything like that. So just an absurdly popular, absurdly profitable franchise. And, it's impossible to overstate how important Pokemon as a franchise has been. And, it's in those early years, especially, it was extremely critically acclaimed. And you look back at Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, Yellow, those games have influenced just such a wide array of titles, not only from Game Freak, but other developers as well. There's a ton of, at the top of this episode, I was talking about Fur Squadron Phoenix being kind of like the game that that picks up the ball and runs with where Nintendo has dropped the ball. And I think that Pokemon is so popular that even though we haven't really gotten any breaks from the Pokemon franchise over the years in terms of like Game Freak not releasing games or even spin-offs from other titles, but it's crazy to look at the sheer inspiration that so many indie developers and even mainstream developers like AAA developers have taken from the Pokemon franchise. And this is just a train that shows no signs of slowing down. And I think that we're going to really see that when the time comes for this Pokemon Presents stream that we are going to be covering in full on this podcast next week. But, Pokemon Red and Blue are among my favorite games of all time. I think that Fire Red and Leaf Green are among my favorite remakes of all time. And the franchise as a whole just has been so influential and just one of my favorite franchises to play. Like even the ones that don't turn out to be the best games, I will still fire them up and play them to completion because I love the Pokemon franchise so much. And it was my first RPG. I got a Game Boy Color in 1998, and alongside that was Pokemon Blue. And I played it so many times. I still could go back and play that game. I can't wait until Nintendo gives me an official way to play these games on modern hardware, because it's ridiculous that we still don't have any kind of way to play these titles outside of replaying Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee if you want that Gen 1 story. And, from there, my love of RPGs blossomed. So the Pokemon franchise really does hold a special place in my heart. And even as it's gone through its highs and lows, I am always finding myself rooting for this franchise, even though it's far from like the plucky underdog that you typically say, like, I'm rooting for this franchise, because, I mean, like I've covered, it is far and away the biggest entertainment franchise on the planet. I would say that Pikachu is maybe the most iconic video game character of all time at this point. Like, he has become so popular, he may have passed Mario in terms of being the most well-known and iconic character in the video game space. I mean, I've debated that in my head so many times. Maybe Mario's taken that back with the success of the Mario movie, but like, I really think that if you were to just poll like random people and like say like how many people know who Pikachu is versus how many people who know who Mario is, I think it's going to be a high percentage either way. But it's got to be pretty close at this point. Pikachu is just so synonymous with pop culture and has expanded out into this merchandising and entertainment empire that Pokemon has become in the years subsequent to the release of Pokemon Red, Green, Yellow, and Blue. That, it's wild that we ever got something that's as iconic, if not even more iconic than Mario, but here we are. And Nintendo has control of both of them. Now, I do also, before we wrap up this anniversary segment, I do want to point out that this week is also the anniversary of The Legend of Zelda, which is obviously a very, very special franchise to Nintendo and a very, very special franchise to many of the listeners of this podcast. It is overall my favorite franchise in video games. So I do want to do some sort of anniversary thing looking at the history of The Legend of Zelda. We have done some of that stuff in the past with specific games, but I've done Ocarina of Time, I've done Wind Waker, I've done the Zelda timeline. But yeah, hopefully do something on the actual development of the original Zelda game, similar to how I did this segment on the development of the original Pokemon games. But we are going to take our final break of this episode, and when we get back, I will be joined by a special guest to continue this Pokemon party. We will be right back. We are back, and now joining me for this Pokemon podcast birthday party is an award-winning disability reporter whose words you've read on IGN, Wired, Fanbyte, and so much more. It's Grant Stoner. Grant, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we were talking before we started recording here that, like, we have followed each other on social media for probably more than a decade at this point.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
And this is our first time talking outside of just like, previously tweets, now Blue Sky posts, whatever social media account or platform was in vogue at the time. So we have, very familiar with each other's work, very familiar with each other's online presence. And this is the first time we're actually talking in person, or I guess face to face, not in person technically. But yeah, it's so great to have you on the show. And we're going to let the audience get to know you because they don't have the familiarity with you, or maybe they do. I don't know. But they don't necessarily have the familiarity with you like I do. So we have a tradition here on All Things Nintendo where we get to know a debuting guest through the lens of their history with Nintendo. So I'm going to ask you two questions. The first one is, what is your first Nintendo game? And you can interpret this however you want. It could be your first game you ever played, first game or console you ever owned, anything that represents kind of your starting point with being familiar and loving Nintendo products.
My first Nintendo game was the original Game & Watch.
Oh, nice. Wow.
The Game Boy handheld. I remember I was, I believe, 4 years old at the time, roughly, and my mom got me and my brother a Game Boy for Christmas. And she got us each of our own individual games, which we shared. I don't remember what my brother's was, but I remember mine was Game & Watch, because she figured a game within several games would keep the attention of a small child, and it did for months. But I remember that was my first intro to Nintendo, and then eventually we received a Super Nintendo, and then just progressed from that point to getting every handheld and every major system.
Yeah, I mean that's actually pretty similar to how I got my Game Boy. I think I mentioned it this past segment when we were talking about Pokemon, but getting a Game Boy Color under the Christmas tree. Mine came with Pokemon Blue, which a great place to start if you're building a Game Boy library.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I remember having that Game & Watch, and at first I didn't know what it was, and not realizing that there was this whole history with the dedicated Game & Watch handhelds. Before the Game Boy even existed. But, Gunpei Yokoi was so instrumental in creating the Game & Watch. And also, little known fact that I covered on a previous episode, the inventor of the D-pad, which, that
Really?
little thing. Yeah. So he had to, for the Game & Watch, had to develop some, method to control your character, and the D-pad was kind of his darling to create and make it so there was some intuitive way. Turns out he revolutionized all of gaming from now until eternity. So so yeah, that's not a bad place to start, and those are bona fide classics, even if they were ports of the original Game & Watch handhelds to Game Boy. I remember those Game Boy Game & Watch collections. They were pretty solid from start to finish.
Yeah, they were intense. I think the one that I received had over 8 games
Wow,
on
yeah.
it, which at the time was a pretty big deal, because most collections were roughly 3 to 5 games. So to have that many was really fun.
Yeah, I remember the one where it's like you have to go back and forth on the screen and like you're like juggling the balls, I think it is. That one
Yep.
was the one that I enjoyed.
I think my favorite was the diver suit. You had to
Oh,
avoid the octopus
oh,
tentacles.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that I played the most. That's the one
Okay.
I vividly remember. Like, ooh, this is fun and engaging as a small child. um, but yeah, I remember playing those games for months, and my brother we asked to borrow it because he became invested after watching me play. So it was a really fun experience.
It's one of those where it comes like a sibling rivalry of anything you
Yep,
can do, I can do better. Like, oh, you got that score on that game? Let me see if I can do better.
yep, we would do that a lot too. We would back and forth and try and beat each other. Yeah, it was very fun.
My brother and I had that exact same experience with that exact same collection. So there you go. Common ground right off the bat. But Grant, that brings us to the second part of this question, which what is your favorite Nintendo game of all time?
I guess it's fitting because this is the Pokemon episode, but the original silver version,
Oh,
probably, I guess you could put in parentheses, Soul Silver, because it's just silver but better, I guess. Um, yeah, I've probably put several hundred hours into that game alone. I've probably beaten it upwards of 50 times
wow.
throughout my life. It's always been my comfort game. Growing up, I was hospitalized a lot because of my disability. So I would bring the Game Boy with me to the hospital, and it was just a way for me to escape. And as I got older and thankfully healthier, if I was just ever going through like, not a great episode, maybe I'm just down the dumps or just sad or whatever, I would just replay Silver and just be instantly calm and at ease again, going through the routes and catching my favorites. And it definitely holds a very special place in my heart. Even to this day, I would say not only my favorite Nintendo game, but I think my favorite game is Silver version of all.
Hey, I mean, I think that is, I have a theory that Pokemon, Final Fantasy, and Persona, your first game that you play in those series ends up being your favorite. The first one that you actually put time into ends up being
Yes.
your favorite.
Mhm.
Was Silver your first Pokemon game?
No, it was actually Pokemon Blue.
Oh, okay, same.
I came home from kindergarten one day and my mom surprised me with it because my brother at the time already had red version because he
Hmm.
was older than me by 3 years. So he already had red version. He was using it with his friends, and I would watch him invite his friends over, and they would trade and battle. And so my mom got me blue version. But at the time, I didn't really understand it. So all I knew was like, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. Whereas with silver version, I had more of a conceptualization of how to raise a team, how to properly distribute levels, type matchups. So for me, that was the first game where I felt like I understood what Pokemon was. Um, yeah, no, my first was actually the original blue version.
Okay, well, you defied my theory. Because, I will fully acknowledge Gen 2 is the best Pokemon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Everyone who says Gen 3 is the best respectfully. I don't agree. Like, you're allowed to have that opinion. You can, it's fine. But Gen 2 just introduced so many new concepts. It had a much more like fleshed out world.
Hmm.
It was just so good. As a sequel, it was so impactful for my love of the series.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Gen 1 was kind of the role that you're talking about with Silver, where it was like my comfort game. I was
Mhm.
I played that so many times as a kid, and then into adulthood when it was like I kind of fell out of favor, or Pokemon kind of fell out of favor with me after Gen 1. I didn't ever play Gen 2 until I was older. And then I was like, oh,
Wow.
well, like I missed like 4 or 5 generations of Pokemon before I got back into it with X and Y. And so I went back and played Soul Silver, and I was like, this is easily the best Pokemon game that's ever existed. And I played Omega Ruby and I got about halfway through Brilliant Diamond and did not finish that.
Mhm.
But yeah, like Soul Silver, like even though I don't think anything's ever going to top my love for Red and Blue, I will fully acknowledge that Soul Silver is probably the best overall Pokemon game. And not only does it add so much to the formula, like the Gen 2 stuff, but that post game is just so phenomenal. And like being able, as somebody who loves Gen 1, that is like near and dear to my heart, seeing your character go and visit Kanto and be able to see like the passage of time and like
Mhm.
what is going on in your old stomping grounds. Like that was so crazy to me. Like I was so like in love with that post game,
Yeah.
and it really makes it feel like such a great 1-2 punch playing Gen 1 and then going straight into Gen 2.
I think for me too, my like moment of oh my gosh, this is like a proper sequel is when you go back to oh my god, what's the island with Blaine? I can't remember.
Cinnabar, where the
Cinnabar, it
volcano had
is Cinnabar.
erupted and like
Yes,
destroyed most of the island.
yes, and then Blue became the gym leader
Yeah, of
of
Viridian City.
Viridian City, yeah. But that was so cool to me, go back to Cinnabar and see it destroyed essentially. Whereas I was like, wait, I was just here like a few months ago and I just beat Blaine and did the manor and everything. And now all of it's gone. I thought that was so neat as a small child to see actual like road progression in a game and have a narrative follow it too, like with Team Rocket and then trying to restore it again. Um, it's just it's so good.
And that
It's easily the best Pokemon game, like you said.
Yes, and that scene, sorry, I'm getting very excited here thinking back of like now it's like jogging my memory of the cool stuff that
Yep,
happens. That scene where Lance just like goes and wrecks shop with his
yep.
Dragonite, like that is such a cool moment in that series or in that game.
hmm Yeah, you just open the shop and he just uses Hyper Beam on that poor guy. But if that was as an actual show, he'd be obliterated at
Yeah,
that point.
vaporized by
Yeah,
the Dragonite.
just gone. Yeah,
That's not just a Dragonite, that is
it's a
the head
Lancer.
of the Elite Four's
Yep.
Dragonite just unloading on you. Yeah. Good night to that
Yeah.
poor innocent fool. But Grant, we'll be talking a lot more about Pokemon. But before we move on from this topic of getting to know you, I would be remiss if I did not ask about you and your reporting in the video game accessibility space. And it's one of those things where it's such an important area that I'm very glad that it's getting more awareness and attention now than it has in the past. But it's one of those things where it's like, yes, we're taking steps, but it still feels like we're not where this industry needs to be, not both in the awareness department, but also in the action items that developers can take. But can you talk to me a little bit about what drew you to report in the disability space, but also the importance of reporting on this angle taken at the industry?
Yeah. It's actually kind of ironic. Growing up, I used to shy away from disability representation. A lot of disabled people have this where they just want to be air quotes like normalized, right? And I never grew up around other disabled people. I was the only physically disabled person in my school district, all the way from K through 12.
Oh, wow.
So I never really like knew anyone else like me. It wasn't until I went to college and met others, but then became friends with um, the school newspaper, where I started to embrace acknowledging my disability. And at the school newspaper, my editor slash best friend in college, who is still a really good friend today, and I always tell this story, and he always like brags to people, yeah, I'm the reason. Um, I got a Nintendo Switch during the first week of launch, and I wanted to review it for the school paper. And at the time, I was already writing for them probably for a good 2 years at this point. And he told me, I want you to review it, but only as an accessible review. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not comfortable with that. He was like, all right, then I just want to publish it. So
Playing hardball.
yeah. So I was like, all right, fine, yeah, I'll do it just to get you off my back or whatever. And it won second place in the Keystone Press Awards
Whoa.
for the review category. And my review was the only review at the paper that won the award. Other writers won awards in their respective fields, but I was the only reviewer that won an award that year. And so I was like, all right, maybe I'll give it a shot.
Maybe, let me dust off my award shelf first,
Yeah.
and then maybe, I'll get back to it.
But so really the reason I started writing from this perspective is because of my friend. And after I realized that there is a need for this type of reporting, I have my own publication since 2018, I believe. It was just a blog, nothing major. And then 2019, I joined Can I Play That? And I was elevated to editor for mobility reviews and content shortly after joining. And ever since then, I've just been covering the industry from this perspective. I've since shifted from doing reviews to like actual reporting. So digging into why these features are made, how these features are made, how they impact the community, and how the community is either using them or feels left behind, but what is or isn't there. Recently I wrote a report on a lot of like allegations behind the scenes at major companies, which I'm not a fan of doing those, obviously, but I feel like there's this narrative of if you're disabled, everyone gets along, we all love each other, and I want people to know that there's more to it behind companies providing options and features. These are real people who are hurt by these actions, who need representation, who need their stories shared with everyone. And I really feel that this type of work can sit alongside the work that every other journalist does. Because with every new game, you can have this type of coverage. You can have the coverage exploring like the intricacies, like I said. You can have coverage exploring like allegations of potential harassment and abuse and so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, disabled people need this representation to fully fit into this industry.
For sure. And I mean, it's the same as a lot of people who have struggled to, get into this industry in one way or another, like having somebody at the table to advocate for you, whether it's you or somebody on your behalf or somebody who's just on the community's behalf, I think is so important. And that can be done through, consulting with game developers, or it can be done through reporting, which, you're doing a lot of right now. And one thing that I've heard a lot of, and from a lot of people who report or really pay attention to the accessibility space, is that, you know, we see companies like Xbox putting out the adaptive controller. I believe PlayStation has one as well.
Yes.
They put one kind of after Xbox, if my
Yeah,
timeline is
it
lined
was
up.
roughly 5 years after Xbox.
Okay.
Mhm.
But Nintendo seems like it's always, despite kind of positioning itself as like the company for everybody, they seem like they lag behind these other companies in terms of progress in this space. Is that accurate from your perspective?
I don't like to do such objective analyses of accessibility because at the end of the day, being disabled is so individualistic. What works for me is not going to work for others and vice versa. Um, so whenever people rightfully critique Nintendo, because I feel like every major company should rightfully be critiqued on what they do or don't do. Um, there's this notion that because Nintendo doesn't have like a physical device or major settings within their games that their products aren't accessible. In reality, Nintendo has more physical software settings like control customization, remapping, offerings of different controllers than any of the other companies.
Mm.
In 2023, Microsoft released an update where it banned all third-party software from their systems. And what people don't realize is that really impacted the disabled community because maybe they can't really use the adaptive controller. Maybe it's too expensive because I know, for example, my setup with the adaptive controller roughly equates to almost $500. And a lot of disabled people can't afford that. So when Microsoft removed these third-party options, all of a sudden the entire platform just wasn't accessible anymore. And Nintendo, despite not having a first-party device, doesn't limit players on what they can use. On top of having a pretty sufficient system settings that you can remap and designate different options. So again, while they don't have like their own device, I wouldn't say they're necessarily behind the other major two within the industry because at the end of the day, especially with disabled people, it's all about what you need and what each company offers. And a lot of times, what I found through my reporting and just general investigation is that Nintendo continues to be on top of accessibility for what they do offer, just on the entire basis. And because their games are relatively simplistic, they don't require a lot of like action or demand physical strain or cognitive strain. But unfortunately, we are in this mindset where options means accessibility. But what we've seen is that's not always the case with things, and Nintendo is a perfect example.
And what you're saying is completely accurate in terms of like, you know, it's so individualized. One of the first articles I ever I wrote when I was very young in my career that got like pretty good traction was probably back in like 2010. And it was an interview with a man who was blind, and he was an avid Guitar Hero and Rock Band player, but also fighting games.
Wait, where did you publish this?
This was examiner.com.
I think I read it.
Oh, really?
I did, yeah.
Wow.
I think so, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I was just, because I think that like for a lot of players, like they don't realize how important accessibility is. for those who do not have the same, motor functions or sight or whatever.
Mhm.
And because I remember when this guy reached out to me, I was like so like blown away that a person who does not have the ability to see the screen could play not only a music game that is so dependent on timing and like playing the right notes, but also like a fighting game. And having him walk me through why those genres are actually really good for the blind community, like to learn how to play, was just mind blowing to me. And that really opened my eyes to like what you're saying of like, every single person with a disability is going to require different things. And I think that's why, like, circling back to your reporting, that is so important that, we get your perspective, we get other people with, different disabilities perspective. And so, yeah, just want to, commend you on your reporting and the important work that you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I try really hard in my reporting to not ever really talk about myself. I do have like pieces that are specifically my opinion. But you can't be an accessibility advocate or disability advocate without highlighting as many people as possible. Because like we both said, it's so individualistic. And so you can't really have like 1 to 3 people representing the entire scope of accessibility in the industry. Going off of what you wrote, I wrote a piece for IGN a few years ago about a Mortal Kombat tournament that is exclusive to blind players.
I think I read that. Look at
Yeah.
this, the circle of
Yeah.
games journalism.
And what I discovered is the man who created and hosts it actually dramatically influenced blind accessibility in NetherRealm games, beginning with Injustice 2.
Oh.
Because he created this tournament, he met with developers at EVO, because he was a competitor at EVO, and they were so blown away by his skill level, like top tier skill level, while having a disability, that he became a consultant. And actually, he was recently in the credits of the newest Mortal Kombat game because it brought him on to make their game accessible.
That's amazing.
So it's really cool when we use our platforms to highlight just the breadth.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Of the disability community, because at the end of the day, you can't only cover a few people and expect it to be the narrative of everyone who needs options or designs or features.
For sure. And, if people want to read your work, we're going to get into plugs at the end of the show, but like, we're going to start moving back towards the Pokemon angle here. Where can people check out your reporting?
Mostly anywhere that is hosting accessibility coverage. I have a somewhat monthly column on IGN. I write for Wired. I'm going to be writing for Mothership, the new publication that just launched.
Yeah.
I've written for Game Informer several times, which was a dream. But basically anywhere that allows me to do the work that I do. But all of that is on my socials. So if you follow me on socials, you'll get updated.
And you can find Grant's social links in the notes of this podcast. We'll also go over that at the end of the show. But Grant, we're talking Pokemon.
Yes.
I guess the segue here is, how is the accessibility in Pokemon?
It is the most accessible series I've ever played,
wow.
except 2018 Let's Go games. I've never been able to play those. And in fact, they're the games responsible for my career. Because I couldn't play them, IGN was gracious enough to have me write a piece for them as a first-time freelancer, which launched my career into what it is today. But because of their motion controls, I've never actually been able to play that game. I've been able to play every other game in the series history except those. But to this day, it still is the most accessible series I've ever played. And as my disability progresses, it continues to be the most accessible, which is good for me.
Yeah, that's great, especially it's one of your favorite series,
Yeah.
if not your favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, even from like a selfish perspective, I wish they would put out a patch that would get rid of the motion control requirement. If for no other reason than the fact that like you don't have to really use like full on motion controls if you're playing in handheld mode. You can just press a button to throw the Pokeball. Why can't you do that with a Pro Controller or whatever controller you want to connect to your Switch? Like I've never understood that, and it drives me up a wall about that game because I love the Kanto games so much. I was like super stoked that there was going to be a remake, and then they're like, oh yeah, it's going to basically be like the controls of Pokemon Go but in a mainline RPG, and I'm like, no.
Which I've never been able to play.
Yeah.
I've never been able to play even the phone game. But to me, that didn't matter to me much. Because I'm not really a mobile player anyway.
Yeah.
So that's okay. That doesn't matter. But whenever they released like a mainline series that had those gimmicks, I was like, oh, this is not great. But thankfully, there was the only series or only game in the series that required those inputs.
Yeah,
you're right. They could have easily just introduced a patch, an optional feature, or even just made it so that if you're not using the Joy-Cons, you can still just hit a button and do it. But they were firm in that, and while I never was able to play it, I guess I have them to thank for my career. So thank you, I guess.
Hey, I mean, we're getting a ton of Nintendo Switch 2 editions, and in the first segment of this episode, I went on a large rant about the Xenoblade Chronicles X $5 upgrade to give you 60 frames per second. I would pay $10 to upgrade Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee to standard controls. Like, I would absolutely do that.
I would pay full price. Immediately, if they're like, yeah, here, I've had sick, here's $70. Enjoy it, take it. Probably not something you want to say, but...
Yeah, don't encourage them.
Yeah, no. If you're listening, Nintendo, don't do that. But I would pay for it.
Well, I mean, we'll go here next because this makes sense. We're about a week away from the Pokemon Presents 30th anniversary live stream. We get one of these every year on February 27th. This one is seeming like it's shaping up to be a big one to celebrate this milestone anniversary. I'm hopeful that we're going to get some classic games. I'm pretty certain that we're going to learn about Gen 10. What would you most hope to see either get announced or get revealed at this Pokemon Presents stream?
Are we allowed to discuss potential leaked information?
Not like straight up leaks, but like we talked about the rumors of some of the classic games, but I'm not really talking about like the potential leak of like the name of Gen 10 or anything like that.
No, not like that. But like you said, the rumor of cluster games returning. That's what I wanted to say. I'd be very happy with that. I prefer the older games to the newer games. I still love the newer games. I have them all. I love them. I've beaten them several times. But there's just something more enticing to play like a top-down, 8-bit-esque grid system Pokemon. To me, is more enjoyable. So if they do release those, I'd be very happy with that. or even just like a collection of
Mm-hmm.
them, I guess. Um, but like you say, Gen 10, I'm interested in seeing. Does it probably reveal the starters? Because they traditionally do that with every gen reveal. So I'm excited to see those. What the new little guys will be. Um, I am curious to see if they really hone in on champions
Yeah.
because they're really trying to make it like the new battle system. So I'm really curious to see like what information they provide on that and how easy it will be to bring your teams over, or if you'll have to rebuild them using champion specific systems. Um, I think there's a lot of questions that the community will rightfully have. Like with champions, Gen 10, um, remakes, because people have been begging for black and white remakes for years at this point. Um, so I'm mostly curious about Gen 10 starters, champions news, and if they'll bring back older games into a newer modern platform.
Yeah, I would do terrible things to get Soul Silver, Heart Gold,
Yes,
Fire Red, and Leaf
yes,
Green. Like, I
all
just
the
let
same
me play
collection.
those, and Black and White, because I never played Black and White. Like,
Oh, really?
that's the missing generation for me. I started it, and like my brother had it. I never had it. So I never really had a DS until the 3DS. I always just played my brother's.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm not the biggest handheld gaming guy, like I am, if I'm playing my Switch, unless I'm on a plane, it is docked.
Yeah,
And I never played Black, White, Black 2, White 2.
I was just
Um,
gonna ask if you played the sequels.
no, I just completely missed that generation. And I would love an opportunity to go back and play that. And like, yeah, it would be great to see some of those classic games come over. Gen 10, I'm extraordinarily curious about. And if there was one, I don't know how into like the Pokemon spin-offs you are. If there was one spin-off franchise that could come back, what would you choose?
Do you remember the GameCube games? Coliseum and Gale of
Oh, of
Darkness?
course.
Yeah, those are easily within my top five favorite games, especially within the series. So if they bring those back, because I know when they revealed the Switch 2 and they revealed the GameCube Virtual Console, Gale of Darkness is one of the games that they
Yeah.
showed. I lost it when they revealed that. I was so excited. It
That's got to
didn't
be a
show
slam
it.
dunk for
Yeah,
next week, right?
I
Like,
would
because like
imagine. Yeah.
what better opportunity would they have to put that on the GameCube library than
Mm-hmm.
the Pokemon Presents? Like, yeah, now
Mm-hmm.
that you bring that up, that's probably the safest bet aside from that we're going to learn about Gen 10.
Hmm. Yeah, I would hope to. Maybe this is a launch, but that they implement home
Hmm.
capabilities. Um, but yeah, those were some of my favorite games on GameCube growing up. So to see them return, which they've all been confirmed at this point, um, I'd be super thrilled with that. I'm very excited for that. Or even if they just continue the series. I don't think they will. I don't even know if the company who made them is still in existence.
Mm.
Um, but I'd be very excited if they either brought them back or continued that series. That
I
was
mean,
definitely
that
one of my favorites.
that would be cool. My pick, I think, would be, I don't know if you played this on Game Boy Color back in the day, the Pokemon trading card game.
Yeah,
That
yep,
was so much fun, where it was just like an RPG, but instead of
yep.
catching Pokemon, you were like getting booster packs and building decks. Like, give me another one of those. Pokemon TCG Pocket was fun for like 2 months, and then I
Mhm.
deleted it off my phone, and I haven't even thought about going back.
Yeah.
Give me an actual like Pokemon TCG RPG, no like microtransactions or like like loot boxes or anything. Like
Hmm.
the only transactions I want to be making in that game are with my in-game currency and buying booster packs. Like that would be so much fun. But I know that like that's a difficult ask these days because of like the state of microtransactions, and they can just rake in money if they charge people real money for booster packs. So my backup is going to be another Game Boy Classic spinoff, and that is Pokemon Pinball.
Yeah, I had the N64 version, and that was really fun.
Yeah, those are great.
They're so good.
I feel like we're due for Gen 10 classic games, Champions, and all the mobile game updates, Pokemon Cafe Remix, Pokemon Masters EX, Pokemon Go, Pokemon TCG Pocket. And then I think that we're ripe for either a remake or a spin-off.
I would say, when was Diamond and Pearl remake? That was
2022?
Yeah, 4 years roughly.
2020, yeah, I think 2022.
So we are right within that timeline of a new remake happening.
Yeah, it'd be cool if it was black and white. I mean,
would
that would be a great way to
Yeah.
transition into kind of like that era. And I mean, it could be maybe X and Y if like, past is prologue, because if you look at Legends Arceus, that predated Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, taking place in the same region. Legends ZA takes place in Lumio City. Could that predate a remake of X and Y? I don't think so. I'm still putting my chips on the table in front of black and white. I mean, well, you never know.
I would say, because they've been like shadow teasing black and white for the past year with like the TCG expansions. There was like the black and white specific expansion. So I would be more, like, if I were to bet on it, I would be more confident with black and white, and then in maybe 5 years, X and Y remake.
I mean, that would be great too. I'm stoked for the Pokemon Presents. In case you can't tell, over the last 3 episodes where I've been talking predictions for this entire time, so I'm ready for it just to happen. And just as programming note on that, actually, is the next episode will probably be a little bit later than usual, since the Pokemon Presents is going to be on a Friday. So if your episode doesn't show up right at the normal time, have a little patience, because I'm going to be recording it immediately after that stream ends, and I'm also going to be working during that time. So it's going to be a sprint to get next week's episode done. But yeah, I mean, Pokemon, lots of stuff to talk about, lots of stuff to look forward to, hopefully next week when that stream happens. But Grant, we're going to transition to a couple of segments that used to be an every episode occurrence, but we've kind of deviated from that a little bit. The first of which is Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our own personal top 5 lists. Since we ran down the history of the Pokemon franchise earlier in this episode and have been talking about it ever since, Grant, this week we're going to put a bow on that topic with a big top 5 list. Our top 5 Pokemon of all time. So you're going to start at 5, count it down to 1, and give me a quick sentence or two about each entry.
Do you mean games or like...
I'm talking the creatures.
The creatures? All right. Number 5 for me, Jolteon.
Okay.
I love all the Eevee evolutions, but Jolteon was my first in Pokemon Blue. So it's mostly a nostalgic factor for me for him. I like his design. I like how he's spiky. I love electric types. Probably one of my, I would say, top 3 favorite typing is electric. I always try to have one on every team I make. So Jolteon would be number 5. Number 4, Gendrar.
Oh, that's a good one.
I don't know why I like him. He's just a guy. He's just a goofy guy. He's a little guy. He floats around, sticks his tongue out, puts bombs on you.
Extremely powerful, especially in Gen 1.
Powerful. Yeah, to defeat Mewtwo with ease.
Yeah.
He's just a guy, and I like a little guy.
He's a shadow.
Yeah. They deserve their moment.
They deserve their moment.
He deserves his. Number 3 for me is Machamp.
Okay.
Because my first ever experience with the franchise, my mom picked me up from preschool and my brother had a pack of Pokemon cards with him. And I, being a little brother at the time, was like, gimme, gimme, gimme. And so my mom made him give me one. And so, I didn't know what he was giving me. He obviously didn't give me the shiny in the pack, obviously. So he gave me a Machop. It's the original design of him holding the boulder above his head
Oh, right.
with
Yeah.
his hand on his hip. And I was enamored with him. I became so obsessed with him. I was like, oh my god, he's so cool. He's awesome. I would look for him in the shows. I would watch the show after school. And eventually, when I learned that he evolved into a bigger version, just with 4 arms, I was like, oh my god, that's sick. That's awesome. It's incredible. Obviously, he became one of my childhood favorites that to this day is still absolutely one of my favorite Pokemon.
I love that because that's not an answer you get all the time. Like when we go down my list, you're going to be like, this is the most cliche list that has ever been said. So I like that you have a kind of a not an uncommon number 3 there.
Yeah, he would be higher, but my 2 and number 1 just hold a special place above him. But he is easily will always be my number 3. My number 2 is Lugia.
Great
Silver, because like we said earlier, Silver and Soul Silver hold a special place in my heart. Reaching Lugia to me was always a mental checkpoint, especially when I was in the hospital. Because I was like, okay, just reach Lugia, get him on your team. You're about to fight the Elite Four. You're about to enter your favorite area, which is when you leave New Boat Town and go to the right to enter Kanto before Victory Road. It's my favorite route in the whole game. And I always had Lugia with me. So he holds a very special place in number 2. And number 1 for me is Steelix.
Steelix?
Yeah, he's my number 1 favorite of all time.
Explain yourself, sir.
When I was really young, I liked snakes. And I saw there was a giant rat snake with onyx. I was like, him, he's the one. He's my favorite. I remember when I got blue version, I asked my brother relentlessly where to find onyx. And he would tell me, like, Rot Tunnel, you have a bit to go. Because I got the Brock, and I would try and catch his onyx, and obviously it won't let you. And I would be so frustrated that why does he get one and I don't? And then in Gen 2, when I realized he evolves into something bigger and cooler, my little child brain was like, him, he's the one, he's my favorite. And to this day, I just love him. I love his design. I love his typage. I love how you get him with the metal coat trading. And he's just my guy, like always. He always will be. I get so frustrated at myself that Steelix is my favorite because the Pokemon Company doesn't produce merch with him because he's not popular enough. So I was like, why? Why can't you release like statues and shirts and things of him? But Steelix is absolutely my favorite, and honestly, probably will be my favorite.
I am going to Pokemon Center right now to see if there's any Steelix merch because
trust me, I've tried.
There's a pin, there's a T-shirt,
but there's no statues.
Yeah, there's no stat. There's a plushie that's sold out.
I probably have it. Is it the sitting plushie?
Sitting cuties, yeah.
Yep, I have it.
Those pins are sick though. Oh my god. Like some of these yeah, wow. I need to look at Pokemon Center more often. Like when I go to Japan, I actually visit like the physical Pokemon centers.
That's what I dream of on.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
I hope you get a chance to do that at some point.
Mhm.
Great list. Like I
Thank you.
really appreciate. I thought that there was going to be a lot of overlap because I chose the most basic selections of all time. I'm so happy you brought some flavor to this segment because I'm just boring as all get out right now. So here are my top 5. Number 5. Oh man, I've gone back and forth so many times on this. I'm going to go with Tyranitar.
He's in my top 10.
Yeah, he's great.
He's
And
amazing.
he's my only Gen 2 representation here. So that's why I didn't want to get rid of him. I almost said Gengar because Gengar is amazing, but we're going to go with Tyranitar. Just a dinosaur made of rock. Like, how cool is that? And he's kind of like one of the more powerful Pokemon you can get in Gen 2. And I don't know, he fills a certain gap in Gen 2 that I really, really was wanting. And I love that whole evolution line. Larvitar is really cool as well.
He's so unassuming. Like when you first see him.
Yeah.
He's just a little guy. He's cute. And then people are always like, oh, I guess he's still cute. He's just a rod. And then you have Tyranitar. It's like, oh my God, you're Godzilla. This is great. This is amazing.
And the just a little guy who turns into something scary is going to continue because number 4 is Gyarados. I that was a foundational memory for me when I learned back as, a 8-year-old kid. No, I guess I was not 11 years old when I got Pokemon, getting to the Magikarp. And I was watching the anime at the time, so I knew that Magikarp turned into Gyarados at some point. And so I just bought the Magikarp from the guy who's selling them for what, 500 Poké dollars or whatever.
I was just about to ask you if you ever did that.
Oh, every time. I always do because like that's the best bargain you could possibly have in that game. Because like if you play your cards right, by the time you get to Vermilion City, you'll have a Gyarados.
Yeah.
And I mean, not that you're going to use Gyarados against Lieutenant Surge because he'll get zapped, but like, that's a scary thing to throw out when you're like, have a team full of level 25 Pokemon and you're throwing a Gyarados out. That's going to strike some fear into those NPCs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number 3 for me, I mean, it's Mewtwo. Like, just
nothing wrong with that.
The personified, I guess, Pokonified is that a word that we can make up? Just edgy and cool and powerful and like was the ultimate like source of envy in Gen 1. And like especially going to the theaters as a kid and seeing that first movie was just, and like especially the episode of the anime before that where like Gary is going up against and like he goes up against the Mewtwo and it's still in the armor and just wrecks him. I was like, this is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life, was going to see this movie in theaters. I wish I still had, because that was when they gave the Ancient Mew cards, right?
I have it. Yeah.
I didn't have mine. I got rid of my Pokemon cards when I was a kid. Very stupid decision. I wish I could go back in time and change that. But in a recent trip to Japan, I went and bought an Ancient Mew card from one of their card shops. So I did reclaim that one. So that's my number 3, Mewtwo, which, it's not going to get any less mainstream from here because number 2 is Charizard.
As it should be.
Charmander was always my starter in Gen 1. Like every once in a while when I do my playthrough, I'll choose Squirtle. On occasion, it'll be Bulbasaur, but like Charmander is usually my go-to. He makes it the hardest in the early parts of the game. It's almost like the hard mode of Gen 1 because, Charmander is weak against the first 2 gyms in Gen 1, or not effective against Brock, and then they use ground type and that'll be super effective. But it's completely weak and useless against Misty. So like I love that it was a challenge right off the bat. And then, you get to the grass gym and it's like, just, don't worry guys, I've got this.
Just press a button and you're done.
Yeah. So Charizard's my number 2. And then number 1 for me, I've said it many times on this podcast, it's Dragonite. I think that entire evolution line is super fascinating. I love the theories that Gyarados was supposed to be the final evolution for them, but like there's something really charming to me about the fact that you get Dratini, Dragonair, and then Dragonite is just a big anime dragon. And it's just such a weird evolution. I don't like the mega evolved version that they introduced in Legends ZA. I think it's a lazy design. But yeah, Dragonite, it was always kind of like an ultimate goal for me before I got to the Elite Four. And then when I get there and Lance has a Dragonite that's just super powerful, that was always really, really fun for me. And then when Pokemon Go came out, I was super into that for a couple of years when it first hit. And Dragonite was basically the end game for that, right? Like you wanted to get Dragonite because he was the most powerful when it was only the Gen 1 Pokemon. And yeah, it just kind of stuck with me. And now he's been my favorite for, 20 years at this point. And yeah, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
If you were to ask me my top 10, most of your top 5 is within my top 10. So we're very close.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
I regret to inform you Machop and Steelix are not in my top 10, but I respect the picks. I respect the picks.
We just be friends. It's true. All right, it's fine.
All right. Well, that brings us to the final segment of this episode, Grant. It is the eShop Gem of the Week, a chance for you to give some shine to a game that might not otherwise get it on this podcast. What is your eShop Gem of the Week?
I guess keeping to the monster catching theme, Coromon, which is sort of a nod to the original 1 through 3 gens of Pokemon. You play as a Lutz researcher in the land of Coromon, and you go out on an adventure. You catch Coromon, obviously, and they evolve in the same way that Pokemon do. The stat distribution system. So Pokemon has like EVs and IVs. Coromon has potency values, and you can put the stats manually however you wish every time you level up. So it's really cool because
I like that.
Yeah, you can essentially make any Coromon into whatever you want it to be. So if you have one but you want it to be more physical based, just pump a bunch of points into physical attack. Or if you want like more tanky, defensive, you just pump more into defense stats. The world is beautiful. It's very reminiscent of like a combination gens 2 and 3 in terms of like town layouts, overall design. And it came at a time where I was really itching for a return to the classic Pokemon formula. And this is well beyond the point where Pokemon was very 3D with its movements and gameplay and such. So it was really cool to be able to go to a game that is still very unique, has its own identity, but you can very clearly see its inspiration. And it's easily one of my favorite turn-based RPGs that I have. I have it on my Switch and my Steam, and I have like different playthroughs I do different challenges. Sometimes and there's options within the game you can manually turn on, like increase difficulty, randomize your Coromon. It's just really fun. It's definitely something when I get an itch to go back to the originals, I'll just free up Coromon. It's good. It's a good time.
Well, I made the point earlier in the show when I was reviewing Fur Squadron Phoenix, which is a Star Fox inspired game that's hit Steam this week and hits Switch next week, that when Nintendo doesn't give, or any major publisher doesn't give people the thing that they want, you can expect an indie developer will slide into that. We saw it with Metroid and Castlevania. Now we're seeing it with Star Fox. We see it now with Pokemon. Like, Game Freak and the Pokemon Company and Nintendo don't want to give us, at least to this point, as of this recording, the classic games on Switch. So an indie developer basically made a classic Pokemon game of their own. I mean, obviously not called Pokemon, not with the same like monsters or anything like that. But here it is, and it came out on Switch in 2022. It cost $20, if that sounds up your alley. Coromon, Coromon. So go check that out if that's up your alley. But Grant, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of All Things Nintendo.
Thank you for having me. It was such a joy, and as I said, it's so good to finally speak with you and talk about my favorite series.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you reached out, and we'll have to do it again sometime. And thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, my Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in, but you can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on Blue Sky or Instagram at Brian P. Shea. Grant, tell everyone where they can find you on social media and anywhere else online.
Yeah, primarily, I'm on Blue Sky now. I've since abandoned other platforms for obvious reasons. But you can find me on Blue Sky at supercrypt1994.bsky.social. That's mostly where all my updates are with my work and everything. But you can also find me on IGN and other websites that let me write about accessibility stuff.
That is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of All Things Nintendo. Before we get out of here, I just want to give a special thank you to the $10 patrons of the podcast. Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chad Brecky, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jawar Hello, Johnny Five, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, KC Radio Man, Cody Gibson, Creeper 207, Ozman 83, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichart, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Zane Sink, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Thank you so much for allowing me to continue to do this show week after week. It's not possible without support from people like you.
Hey there, I'm Hugh from Moderation, and if you like today's show, why not check out Roll for Riz, a podcast as ridiculous and cheesy as its title implies. You might have heard of Isekai. You might have heard of Reverse Isekai. But have you heard of D&D Reverse Isekai, where an adventuring party finds themselves in modern-day Japan with their powers completely and utterly intact? It sounds ridiculous, right? But it sounds like you want to listen to it, right? Find Roll for Riz wherever you can get your podcasts.